The Mandalorian was created and produced by Jon Favreau and had its season finale just a couple of nights ago. I haven't done a TV show review in a while. I think it's been at least a year and a half or so since I've done one. And I've mainly tried to stay away from doing one because it's a lot more difficult to keep track of all the different TV shows that come out. And also, there's just the idea of how I want to tackle sort of thing. But being a lover of Star Wars who has recently become disenfranchised with the IP thanks to the fandom and also how Lucasfilm under Disney has reacted to the fandom and its toxicity, it made me less excited for anything that comes out. But then on Disney Plus we had The Mandalorian, a show that came out during that period where I was way too busy and stressed out to do any kind of videos. And, you know, because I waited so long to review it, I decided to wait until the end of the season to actually talk about the show. And keep in mind, this will be spoiler-heavy for all of it, and this will be a nice experiment to see maybe how I'd want to review shows in the future. Would I want to do a comprehensive review of the entire season, a comprehensive review of each episode, and then a full consensus after the video, or just a review after each episode? Right now, I'm trying the longer option, which is option number 2, a comprehensive review of each episode, and then a full consensus after the video. I don't know, we'll see how it works. All I know is that it's going to be hell to edit this video in the long run. First, we get Chapter 1, simply titled The Mandalorian. We first see Mando, who is a part of the Bounty Hunters Guild in the Outer Rim, enter a bar where he's searching for his first target in the show. He picks a fight with some thugs that are bullying a patron, defeats them, and then we learn that the patron that they were messing with was actually, in fact, the target that he was looking for. As he is trying to get back to his ship, he's offered a nice-looking transport, that's being driven by a droid, but refuses in favor of a worse-looking one simply because the droid wouldn't be piloting it. He's able to turn in the bounty as well as 3 other bounties to Grief Karga, played by Apollo Creed himself. And because he gets such a low payout despite having turned in 4 separate bounties, which, from my understanding, they were all very low targets anyway and nothing really meaty, Karga offers Mando an off-the-books job, and we come to learn that the client I don't think he was ever actually given a name. I think people mostly just called him the client, but looks to be an ex-Imperial with stormtroopers as bodyguards, and we establish the job. Mando is to go to an Outer Rim planet and capture a 50-year-old, target, and bring him back to the client, dead or alive. In my head, I almost said a 50-year-old bounty hunter, but that's not accurate at all in any way. But dead or alive, preferably alive, according to a doctor that's associated with the client. After getting an initial payment for the job by the client in a rare metal called Beskar, which is considered a purely Mandalorian metal, I believe it is basically Mandalorian iron, he goes down into the sewers where we see a tribe of Mandalorians have made their home down there, possibly hiding from society, or maybe they're just down there because they had nowhere else to go, which, in my opinion, the latter was a strange assumption to make at first, but, you know, we went in, there were many possibilities, I didn't know which one it could be. Anyway, we meet the Armorer, and the Armorer takes the Mandalorian, or makes the Mandalorian a new piece of armor out of the Beskar that he brought, and then he heads off planet to find the target. He gets attacked by some creatures on the planet and is helped by an Ugnaught farmer named Queel. He offers to help the Mando because if he does, then the valley that he lives in will become peaceful, because those protecting the target that the Mando is going after are bringing nothing but chaos into the valley. The last 10 minutes of the episode focus on the actual compound in which the target is being kept. As the Mando devises a plan, he sees an IG unit voiced by Taika Waititi walking up to the compound. They meet up after the IG unit takes out a few bodyguards, and they devise a plan to split the reward for the target, and then they defeat the remaining enemies. They finally make it inside the compound and are taken aback by the target which, while being 50 years old, supposedly, he looks like a fucking baby. And here we get what the internet has called Baby Yoda, and I will not call him that, because that is not accurate. I will call him the child for the rest of the review, because as of now, that is still his proper name. IG-11 attempts to terminate the child, but Mando kills the droid, reaches out for the child, and then that ends the first chapter. Few opinions to throw out there. The first scene was predictable and felt more like a fan film, but I at least found it enjoyable. The target in the initial opening, played by Horatio Sands of SNL fame, was one of my least favorite parts of the first episode. He was there just to spout exposition and make references. I also didn't enjoy hearing only his voice for a good 5 minutes. I got rather bored and annoyed at that part. And then the first half or so is basically just there for a couple of reasons. To make the Mandalorian look like a silent badass, and for lots of nostalgia and fan service moments, including a Life Day reference, once again making it feel like a higher budget fan film, and made everything feel surface level at first, despite how Werner Herzog always makes a scene amazing. Which actually made me worry a little bit about future episodes. Not the Werner Herzog thing, but the other stuff. But the turning point for the episode was when Mando goes down into the sewers, where we see all of these other Mandalorians, and I loved this. I loved that we got to see an idea of what Mandalorian culture was like after the fall of the Empire. A few good terms that we would learn, we would know more about going forward, like foundlings. And while the armor is melting the Beskar, we get flashbacks, well timed to the preparation of the armor, and we're given an idea of the main Mando's backstory with a young child in the flashbacks being carried by parents while they run away from an invasion, which at this point it's kind of masked, but at the early point, I assumed, yeah, this is obviously the child from the flashbacks, and depending on how old he is, if they go off of Pedro Pascal's age, it would put him sometime during the Clone Wars, so I assumed that it was a separatist droid invasion during the Clone Wars, thus visually telling us why the Mando could possibly have a distrust for droids. And from that, I understood why it was important for Mando to spend all of his credits that he just got just to melt a small bit of Beskar. He was obviously not a born Mandalorian, and the armor was important to him because it's how he proves himself, in a way. And when he meets Queel later in the episode, we start to see more of those Western tropes promised before the show premiered, with things like the civilian helping the Lawbringer bring peace to their corner of the world, the cowboy having to learn how to break a horse, or in this case, a blurg. And I was happy to see some of them showcase. Sure, they were familiar, but they at least lended to helping us understand the kind of tone going forward. And IG-11 was a definite highlight for me, because I loved how he moved in battle, and the consistent self-destruct gag was priceless. I also loved seeing in the end fight sequence that they were going for more of a Indiana Jones route with the Mandalorian, rather than make him somebody all-powerful and doesn't make mistakes, basically like a Mary Sue, which I hate that term, but that is the most well-known term for it. And by Indiana Jones route, I mean that the Mando is a person. He can get overwhelmed, he's not perfect all the time, and that's really one of the most important and most appealing things about Indiana Jones as a character for me, is because he's a person, he's not perfect at all. But the biggest moment in the episode for me, as I'm sure it was for all of you, was the reveal of the child. I don't think anyone really saw this coming, and if you did, you're a fucking liar. And that's only because I'm not aware of any leaks that came out before. Actually, if they did, then I'm sorry, but as far as I had heard, I didn't hear any rumblings of any new character of Yoda's species showing up, let alone a very young one in this show. Overall, I liked the episode. I thought that it was a good first episode, especially considering that this was a first-time director at the helm. As far as live-action filmmaking was concerned, I've always had a respect for Dave Filoni, and was happy that he was getting 2 episodes, to give him something to cut his teeth on. Still, as much as I didn't care about the fan service given, I understand that it was kind of to help draw people in and make it to where, this was in that universe, but because of that, it still felt like a high-budget fan film throughout. And then we get Chapter 2, titled The Child. Mando takes the child back to his ship where he is attacked by Trandoshans right before, implying that they themselves are guild members looking for the child, especially because they had one of those trackers on them, and Mando dispatches all of them, but not before he is wounded. As he's making camp, he treats his wounds, and the child at this point it kind of suggested that he wants to use the Force to heal Mando, but Mando just keeps putting the child back into his floating carriage or whatever the hell that thing is. When the duo get back to the Razor Crest, his ship, Jawas have stripped this part before. Sorry, I had a brain fart. They stripped it for parts. Now, I will admit that at first I thought that this was Tatooine, which disappointed me, because I wanted to see new worlds and locales, and I never really thought that maybe Jawas could be seen on other planets, but luckily I found out I was wrong in this assumption after I checked online after the episode was finished the first time that I watched it, and also throughout the show we get more Jawas on different planets, so I rest my case on that part. Anyway, Mando retaliates by disintegrating a few of them, and this entire scene made me think more of Indiana Jones, particularly the tank sequence in Last Crusade. Sadly, the Jawas defeat him, and he's left in the desert as their sandcrawler drives away. Without a ship to leave the planet, without a ship in order to leave the planet, Mando goes to the only friendly person that he knows on the entire planet, Queel. And being a good citizen, like he was in the last episode, offers to help. I will help you. I have spoken. Queel helps set up a negotiation between the Mando and the Jawas, where they refuse to just give him back the parts to his ship, but are willing to trade, because Jawas are fucking assholes. They ask for a couple of things, Mando's armor being the first thing, the child, but eventually they settle on an egg, and he finds a Mudhorn cave where he battles the resident Mudhorn so that he can get to his egg, and nearly gets his ass handed to him. With only a knife left on him, he prepares to get trampled by this big-ass thing, and is saved by the child, who uses the Force for the first time in the show to levitate the Mudhorn, confounding the Mando, who then just outright kills the creature with his knife, and then takes the egg in the cave back to the Jawas. By the way, the image of them devouring the egg is nightmare fuel, for sure, despite it being played for laughs. That shit was terrifying. But anyway, they give him back the parts for his ship, which Queel helps him in putting back together. Mando offers Queel a job as a crew member on the ship, but Queel says that he doesn't want to work for another master after being in indentured servitude for so long in his past. And with the Razor Crest repaired, Mando and the child fly away, thus ending the episode. A couple of thoughts that I had after watching the episode. The child, from looking at it, was obviously a hybrid creation of both practical puppet effects and CGI, and while the CGI was sometimes noticeable, it never detracted from how amazing everything looked. Plus, it's just so goddamn adorable after just less than 5 minutes of screen time, and yeah, as you could probably tell as we're going in, I loved Baby Yoda. He was adorable and so cute, and oh my god. I even asked my wife if I could get a plush of him when it came out. She still says no, but I'm most likely gonna do it anyway. Also, we're shown in this episode that regardless of whatever your preconceived notions were about bounty hunting in the Star Wars universe, it's not as glamorous as maybe we once thought. I know it wasn't for me. Some of the first few minutes involved a Mando chasing after some Jawas while they were being a nuisance after tearing apart his ship, and while they're throwing trash at him when he's trying to kill them. And not to mention the fight between him and the Mudhorn. I mean, Jesus Christ. This part confused me, but when Queel and Mando are heading back to the Razor Crest, they talk about the child and his wizard-like abilities, I guess you could say, and neither understand what it is. I know it's been a quarter century at this point since the Jedi Purge in their world, or in their universe, but it's likely that people in general have basically forgotten about the Jedi, but I don't understand it because there must have been at least legends or stories, not to mention the fact that while I'm unsure about how long Ugnaughts typically live, Mando lived through the Clone Wars. You're telling me that he never at least heard about space wizards called Jedi with weird abilities like that? This episode didn't feel as important as the first episode and had kind of a filler episode sort of feel, but I did enjoy it because a lot more happened thematically than storytelling-wise, and we got to establish more of who the Mando is as a person, as well as just giving us smaller moments of character development for him and Queel and even the child, and giving the Mando more reason to contemplate what he's actually going to do with the child in the long run. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't an amazing episode to me. Now for Chapter 3, titled The Sin. At the start of the episode, we see the Mando inadvertently bonding with the child and are given more, quote, Baby Yoda cuteness. He turns the child over to the client and also learns that the client also hired IG-11, the Transdojans, and many other bounty hunters in order to just basically increase the odds of the job getting done. And I was personally unsure of it, of if he would have given the others Beskar, but it felt like because the Mandalorian was the one to bring him in, he rewarded him with an entire container of Beskar. Now, I looked back at the episode. This was a thought that I had going in, but when I rewatched the episode, I forgot that that Karga also got some Beskar for himself, so I guess I was overthinking it a little too much, but also wasn't remembering all the details. But anyway, after turning in the child, he heads back to the sewers to turn in the Beskar for better armor. We get more insight into why they're down in the sewers and how the Great Purge, as it was called, was done by the Empire. At first, when the Great Purge was mentioned in the first episode, I thought maybe they were referring to the Jedi Purge, but it seems more like the Great Purge was a separate incident involving the Mandalorians, and sounds more like a mass genocide of a culture to me. We also get the consensus that the other Mandalorians just how they feel about one of their own doing jobs for Imperials, and even get some more insight into their culture. The armor melts the Beskar, and our favorite Mando gets a new shiny set of Mandalorian armor, and at this point he's really regretting the decision to turn over the child, and you could tell whenever the armor was asking him about the sigil and mentioned the Mudhorn, and he said that he wasn't worthy of it because he didn't kill it, and, you know, he basically acknowledged that the child outright saved him. And as for the Armorer Forged, we get another sequence where we get more flashbacks to the Clone Wars. Definitely, or actually no, it was confirmed at this point that it was the Clone Wars because you actually see the Separatist battle droids. And, you know, it's a couple of the same shots, but more connecting scenes, including right after Mando's parents are killed. He meets up with Karga again, this time in his new armor, and Karga offers Mando the pick of the bounties, but obviously that doesn't satisfy the Mando. He's still trying to distract himself, but it's not good enough. So he just picks a job and goes to head off planet, and then something reminds him of the bonding that he went through with the child, and just made him hesitate. So because of that, he turns around and heads back. The rest of the episode is basically one long action sequence, and it really begins to ramp up after this point. The client implies in a conversation heard before the battle that he only cares that the, quote, necessary materials are extracted from the baby. And the Doctor emphasizes then and later, when confronted by the Mando, that not only does someone else want the child alive, the Doctor also doesn't want any harm to come to the child himself. So when the Mando has a chance to kill the Doctor, he instead spares him. Mando continues outside where guild members, including Karga, are in the town square and are planning to kill the Mando in order to secure the child for the client. There is a gunfight in the streets, and when all hope is lost, the Mandalorians, all of them pretty much, come to the rescue and offer covering and suppressive fire in order to help the Mando escape with the child. Karga catches up to the Mando. They have a quick standoff in which the Mando wins with a blaster shot to Karga's chest, and the ship takes off. And right after, Karga is shown to still be alive thanks to a small ingot of Beskar that he had in his jacket from earlier, which was just another quintessential Western trope. I think my favorite part of any episode is the further lore building of the Mandalorian clan as far as the way goes. Even the idea that it is shameful to remove your helmet in front of a living being, even if you're forced to by your own means or someone else's. And another favorite part was just the continuation of the flashback sequences where it ends with a battle droid ready to fire on a very young Mandalorian, further confirming why Mando hates droids. And the action sequence that starts when Mando is going back for the child is wonderfully staged and is just a super long one-man army sort of sequence that is extremely satisfying, but not to the point where it goes back on what I mentioned earlier, which was the whole Indiana Jones sort of route with everything. And the final one involving the Mandalorians and the Guild just ramped up the quality of the action scenes up to that point, which, especially with another emphasis on the Star Wars universe's reverence for old spaghetti westerns. And I was actually surprised about this, but I don't particularly care for Deus Ex Machina sequences, but the one that we got with the Mandalorian tribe coming to Mando's rescue was actually amazing. Not only was it satisfying, but it also felt well placed in Star Wars lore. Now, small spoiler for Rise of Skywalker, but I'm gonna assume that if you're watching this with spoilers, you've probably already seen Rise of Skywalker anyway, so here it goes. That scene with every ship in the galaxy coming to the rescue just felt way too good to be true and unneeded as far as fan service goes. But this was one time that, sorry, I had a brain fart. That time in Rise of Skywalker felt unearned in Star Wars. It felt like one of the only times that wasn't earned. This felt right, especially because of their creed. They will protect their own, even if it means that nothing good can come out of it, and even if you don't particularly care for the person in trouble. Nothing says that better than when the Mandalorian that Mando fought earlier in the episode actually looks at him and says, "This is the way." This was the episode that truly made me excited for everything that was going forward. The prior two episodes, I just thought, okay, each week I'll see what happens, but this Episode 3 was where I started actively anticipating each episode. It was the strongest episode to that point, and I was more than happy because the director of that episode, Deborah Chow, had been picked to be the showrunner and consistent director for the Kenobi series. And the good stuff, especially the further exploration of the Mandalorian culture, as well as the exploration of Mando as a person, was still the main driving force for my excitement. Although I'm not going to keep saying that for every episode. I only will if something drastic changes or we get something really, really substantial. And for Chapter 4, titled Sanctuary, the first scene we get on this new planet is where a village, a farming village, is being attacked by raiders, and after that we are shown the Mando and the child in the Razor Crest. The child is being adorably troublesome as per usual, and the Mando picks a planet for the two to try to hide out on, and it just so happens to be the planet where the village was in the opening. He walks to a nearby town with his full armor on, and the child walking beside him. A really strange choice for somebody who's trying to hide himself, which I get the armor part, I get that, but at least hide your more unique and noticeable companion, just saying. He runs into Cara Dune, an ex-rebel shock trooper, whom both of them mistake the other for guild members, and when they find out their respective truths, they sit down for lunch after a brief scuffle, and then they part ways. Before Mando leaves to find another planet to hide out on, some of the villagers from the terrorized village offer to pay credits for his help. He agrees, and they also pick up Cara as well along the way. After they make it to the village, they... Sorry, my throat's starting to hurt. I'm gonna have to take a break right after this, and then I'll just finish the other half of the video later, or at least not in your guys' time, but in real time here, or however I would put that. But anyway, after they make it to the village, they make him feel nice at home, even with his own little shack, and we get more insight once again into who he is and how his culture is. We learn that exactly what a foundling is, which is an orphan taken in by Mandalorians, and we learn that Mando was a foundling, and basically how if he removes his helmet in a public setting, or it's removed at all in front of a living person, he can no longer wear it. That implies that he's giving up the warrior life for a more peaceful life. Cara and the Mando go into the woods to track down the raiders, but they happen to stumble upon fresh AT-ST tracks, and it seems like just another remnant of the Empire that was still there that's been taken over by raiders, which was a really nice touch, I thought. At first they decide to leave the village, but Mando comes up with the idea to train villagers so that they can protect themselves and their families, another Western trope, and actually felt more along the lines of something like Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven. So yeah, you had the samurai and the Western trope, so that was nice. But also something that happened similarly in a Clone Wars episode with Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and some bounty hunters. Anyway, moving back on, we then get the classic training montage, and when the defenses are ready, both Mando and Cara, whichever one, whatever I feel like saying at the time, they head to the encampment to draw out the raiders. Their plan works, and the AT-ST follows them to the village, in which they and the villagers are able to defeat it by causing it to fall into a very deep pond. The episode ends with Cara and Mando still living in the village, and Mando decides maybe he should leave the child there because the child will be safe and cared for and loved. And he has to then take back his decision when Cara dispatches a guild member that tries to kill the child with a sniper rifle blaster. And so, because of that, the Mando takes the child, and they head back to the Razor Crest to find another place to hide out, thus saying goodbye to the villagers and Cara, for now, at least for the latter. Like I said earlier, I'm confused as to why he couldn't have just left the child on the ship, because if you want to hide and it's against your creed to remove your armor in public or in front of others, like I said, at least hide the damn baby that is of a rare species and sticks out like a sore thumb, despite the fact that it's less than a foot tall. The use of cinematography during the scenes with the AT-ST were amazing. I love how it visually depicted it as a monster, like a giant troll coming out of the woods to terrorize the nearby villagers. This episode was a good one, but not one that really stuck out to me. Sure, we got the normal stuff with the exploration of culture and our hero, but I think I was mostly put off by the lacking of a consistent narrative that the show seemed to be hinting at for episodes to come, aside from Mando and the child going to a random planet to hide. An adventure happens, and then they have to leave. But also, there was this other weird feeling after the episode that the majority of side characters would just basically be one-and-done characters. I was interested in Cara, and yet we had to say goodbye to her almost immediately. Of course, when it came to my fears about the focus of future episodes, the next episode... Alright, I'm back. I was even able to give myself a little bit of water because I realized my throat's starting to kill me, so... So now we can proceed with the 5th episode, titled The Gunslinger. In this episode, we start off with a guild bounty hunter chasing after the Razor Crest, and the Crest easily dispatches it. But since the Crest has taken a fair amount of damage, Mando lands on the nearest planet for repairs, which just so happens to be Tatooine this time. He lands in Mos Eisley, in the same hangar that the Millennium Falcon was back in A New Hope. He gets out and meets the resident mechanic who refuses to repair the ship unless she gets paid, so Mando goes off to find work, leaving the child inside the Razor Crest asleep. He finds his way through the city in a nearby cantina, or to a nearby cantina, the same one from A New Hope, and runs into a young man named Toro Callaghan, who is sitting in the booth that Han did when that scene that shall not be named happened, and tells him that he's going after a high-caliber bounty called Fennec Shan in the Dune Sea so that he can get into the guild, and offers Mando the entire reward if he offers help with this particular bounty, since Fennec Shan is said to be a very skilled assassin. Mando agrees and goes back to the hangar where the mechanic has discovered the child and is taking care of him. She tells him that he should not be leaving such a young child alone, and Toro gets a look at the child before he and the Mando move on to the Dune Sea. They make their way out to the dunes where they're ambushed by a couple of sand people, the Tusken Raiders, and before Toro can wipe them out, Mando negotiates safe passage into the Dune Sea with them through sign language. They later come across a dewback dragging the corpse of a bounty hunter behind it, which was set up as bait by Shan. Recognizing that they were at a disadvantage due to her elevated position, you know, it's too late, Anakin, I have the high ground. And the fact that it's during the daytime, the Mando suggests waiting until nightfall. They wait and then assault her with their speeder bikes and flash grenades, because it blinded the scope. They're able to capture her, but Mando must find a new transport in order to get everybody back to Mos Eisley. So Mando goes off to find a dewback. While Toro awaits the Mando's return, Shan tells Toro rumors from Navarro, the planet that Karga's sect of the Guild is located, and how a lone Mandalorian laid waste to the entire Guild and was with a child. Toro puts the pieces together because of the fact that he saw the child earlier, and when Shan offers to help him because the Mando is a more valuable target than she is, he simply guns her down and goes off with the speeder bike. When the Mando returns the next morning and only sees the corpse of Shan, he knows what's happened and what is coming. He makes it back to the ship where Toro has taken the child hostage along with the mechanic. There's a quick standoff and Mando kills Toro and rescues the child. He is then able to pay the mechanic with credits that he took off of Toro's body. He then takes the child and leaves Tatooine for whatever the next location is. We get a quick cut back to Shan's body, and we see a pair of boots walk up to her and kneel before the screen cuts to black and the episode is over, leaving us with no idea who the random person was in the desert. So first off, I will say that the scene with Mando talking to the Tusken Raiders in sign language was actually a pretty awesome touch. And it gave me a nice reminder of a possible story route in the first Knights of the Old Republic game that I really enjoyed, and it helped further humanize the Tusken Raiders, something that I hope that they do a little bit more of in the current canon. And the speeder bike sequence was at least clever and interesting. That being said, it's time to bitch about this episode. Up until this episode, The Mandalorian did have fan service and nostalgic moments, but for the most part it had shown restraint in it, focusing more on the new rather than the old and familiar, unless it tied somehow into the story or the character development. And then we get this episode. We are immediately forced to go back to Tatooine, which had honestly been done to death in the films alone, and we are given many visual nods to those times. Look at that hangar. It's that one that you know. Look at this street. Characters you've loved have walked down that street, and you've watched them do that before. Look at this cantina. You know it, and you love it, and droids used to not be able to be allowed in here, remember? Do you also remember when Han shot first? It was right there in that spot where this new character is sitting, but of course, all of this complaining doesn't mean as much as long as there's a good story for all of this to serve as a backdrop. Well, there's definitely a story here, but I wouldn't say that it's very good. It was overly predictable, especially if you knew the basic description of the episode the week prior, and in the long run, it doesn't go anywhere. Technically, the same could be said for the last episode, but they made up with it with that feeling, or for that feeling that you could get with character reveals and development, things that I loved about the show, and also Cara Dune was an interesting character, and so was that village girl who may or may not have been either a former rebel or stormtrooper. And mostly I thought that, I forgot to mention in the last one, I thought that because she's the only one who knows how to use a gun. My point is that there's no development that happens for our main character or the child or any new characters in this show, and the new characters are either not treated as important or they are just too annoying like Tora was. At most this episode was fine, but also two things that I do have to complain about. Having seen the entire show and having watched episode 4 again, and instead of watching this episode, instead I went from 4 to 6 to test a theory. I have come to the conclusion that you can absolutely skip this episode and nothing will be changed, or really feel like it's missing from the story. And most people online have come to the conclusion that the main episode's main point was the quasi-reveal, non-reveal involving the boots in the desert. Well, having seen the rest of the season, I can already tell you that that scene at the end has no relevance to the entirety of the show. And hell, they may just give us an answer for it in the next season, sure, but I highly doubt that, for me at least, it would make up for this less than lackluster episode. And what makes it a tad bit worse is that the episode was directed by Dave Filoni. He went from directing a decent pilot to what I believe is the worst episode of the season, and that really worries me. I hope that he can learn from how people react to this episode, because I want him to be better, I want him to succeed and move on to better things, because I've respected Dave Filoni for many years, and I've loved how, how he has, the name that he's made for himself in the name of Star Wars, but I don't know, I'm still worried that he's just doomed to make make more amateur decisions and not learn from them, especially if we find out that he's going to be directing any episodes next season. And if I find out that he is, honestly, I'll be hesitant to get excited for those episodes. And for Chapter 6, The Prisoner. Still on the lookout for a hiding place, Mando comes across a ship that's run by an old crew that he was a part of in his youth, and the leader, Ranzar, won't let him or the child hide out there for free, and in order to earn his place there, he has to go with them on a job to a new Republic prison ship. Mando doesn't want to get into it, but, he doesn't want to get into it because they need to use his ship, and he has the child on board, but basically he has no choice if he wants to be in a relatively safe place and have a safe location for both of them to hide out, especially since he's gotten to the point where he really cares about this child. But anyway, the job is to break out a member of their crew on the prison ship. Most of the crew is unsure of Mando, and even the one member that Mando knows already is weird about him, dare I say, cautiously hostile. On the way there, the crew find the child inside the ship, and it seems like the scene was just there to make the audience hate the Mando's new, quote, friends. And one actually jokes about keeping him as a pet and actually fakes almost dropping him, but then the ship makes a hard turn and he actually drops the child, and you know how the entire world reacted when that happened.
I felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced.
They board the ship, which has what seems like a 100% droid crew, some of which the Mando dispatches single-handedly. When they get to the control room of the ship, they discover one lone New Republic soldier. He threatens the group at gunpoint to set off a transponder that would alert the New Republic of an issue, and they would come and destroy the vessel. Mando tries his best to calmly negotiate, but a couple of the crew members want to kill the soldier, to which Mando turns his weapons on them. Things almost boil over until the crew member most familiar with the Mando kills the soldier who accidentally sets off the transponder. Now we only have within like 10 to 15 minutes for them to actually escape with the target. Target, I say loosely. They locate the cell, and it's revealed to be the brother of the crew member who killed the soldier. I'm saying it like this because I don't remember their names, and honestly, they weren't in long enough for me to care, if I'm being honest. Yeah, they locate it. We find out who it is. This guy was another crew member, an old crew member that the Mando left behind on a past job, and he learns that the current job is actually a setup, and they lock the Mandalorian in a cell. But he doesn't stay locked up for too long thanks to being able to dismantle a droid that passes by his cell door. He makes his way back to the control room and begins separating the crew members throughout the ship, dispatching them one at a time, and he eventually catches up to the brother, who appeals to the Mando's order and creed and convinces him to keep him alive while also fulfilling the job that he was given prior. Around this point, a droid crew member is hunting down the child in a strange and deadly game of hide-and-seek on the Razor Crest. But before the droid can kill the child, Mando kills the child, so yay! He then takes the brother back to Ranzar's ship, and as he's leaving, Ranzar plans to shoot down and destroy the Razor Crest, but not before the brother discovers that the transponder is on his person, and 3 X-Wing fighters, all played by Mandalorian directors Deborah Chow, Dave Filoni, and the director of this episode, whose name I always have an issue pronouncing, but I believe it's Rick Famuyiwa? Something like that. He was the director who directed Dope, which I heard was a pretty good movie, but I never actually saw myself. Yeah, and they destroy the ship as Mando escapes the scene. We also get one last scene where it's revealed that the Mando didn't actually kill the crew that was left behind on the New Republic ship, but instead locked them up in a cell, so there you go. I'll admit that I wasn't initially on board with the episode, and I didn't particularly care too much about, the crew, aside from the fact that a couple of them were part of the Mando's past. But I was sold once they got to the prison ship. It had a lot of fun sequences from when Mando took down those droids by himself, the standoff with the soldier, and a touch on classic horror tropes, which I think for the most part was, I don't know, it felt fresh for Star Wars, so that was nice. Especially because I just loved seeing Mando take out each crew member basically from the shadows. And the crew itself was hit or miss. Bill Burr's character was kind of funny, but the Twi'leks and Berg, I forgot what they're called, the big red guys with the horns that look like devils, I forgot what they're called, but those 3 were a little too over the top for me. And in the end, I feel similar with this episode as I did with the second episode, which was also directed by Famuyiwa, however you pronounce his name. I just thought it was good, but not great. And getting to our penultimate episode, Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The Mando, as he is still roaming the galaxy, gets a hologram message from Karga, who explains that the Imperial Remnant on Navarro has taken over the guild operations, and he begins to propose a plan to get rid of them, and also to help the Mandalorian from having to worry about people in the guild and the Empire always trying to catch up with him and the child. He doesn't outright trust Karga, though, so he goes back to the planet from the 4th episode, picks up Kara, and they also meet up with Queel back on the planet that was in episode 1 and 2. And, you know, they do the second one mainly because they need somebody to watch over the child. Oh, sorry, I had to hang now. The Mando also learns that Queel reprogrammed IG-11 as a servant, protector, and nurse bot, which Mando doesn't trust because, again, IG is Guild, and also Mando hates droids. On the way to Navarro, Kara and the Mando are having a friendly game of arm wrestling, which the child sees as a threat to Mando and proceeds to force choke Kara, which Mando stops. On Navarro, Karga and his men meet up with the Mando and his crew, and they make their way to town. The plan that was formed is that Mando will use the child as bait to get close to the client and take him and his protection out. Now, cutting to nightfall, the group rests around a campfire and talk a little bit further about the plan, and they are attacked by flying creatures. One of them, which it looked like a scratch, it may have been a bite, I'm not sure. But anyway, wounds Karga, in turn poisoning him, but he is saved in time by the child, who uses the Force to heal his wounds. The next day, as the group approaches the city, Karga turns on his men and reveals that everybody was really planning on killing the Mando and taking the child to the client, but Karga had a change of heart after the child saved him. They then develop a new plan to get the client, which is Mando will act as a prisoner with the baby carrier in tow and will be brought in by Kara and Karga. That was almost a tongue twister. That or I just can't speak correctly ever. And Queel will take the child back to the Razor Crest, keep him out of harm's way. It becomes clear that Karga was under-exaggerating how much the Empire had taken over, because the entire town is littered with multiple battalions of stormtroopers, but at this point it's too late to turn back. The client tries to see the child inside the childless carrier when he is called by Moff Gideon, who already knows that the child is not in the bar. Gideon then has his death troopers open fire on the bar, killing the client and the stormtroopers in there, and the bar becomes surrounded by stormtroopers and Gideon himself, who lands in the middle of the square in his own personal TIE fighter. Scout troopers who intercept a transmission from Mando to Queel follow the signal, chase down Queel, whom they kill, and they take the child, and that's how the penultimate episode ends. This episode was already off to a great start because it went and established that it wouldn't just be another planet hop. We actually, you know, it became more serialized instead of episodic, which, me personally, I more prefer the serialized stuff, but I'll talk more on the difference between the serialized and episodic stuff a bit later in the video. But anyway, we also get more info on Queel's past and how he was a slave to the Empire for so many years before he was able to buy his freedom using his skills. I also liked Queel's message about how droids are just neutral reflections of their masters, which I feel like is ties to an important theme for the show and, you know, morality in general. And touching on the child and his Force abilities, and further reflecting the neutral reflection aspect with the droids, the child is kind of like that. He's, you know, the camera focuses a lot on the child witnessing action, whether it's the Mando being violent or others being violent to him, and whenever he attacks Kara with the Force, it's because he perceives a threat to his guardian, which shows that he can be protective and is capable of, obviously, leaning dark side, but at the same time he can Force heal, which is an inherently light side ability. And I'd love if I'd love it if the show began tackling the idea that Mando's actions could form the child's development and really see where it goes, but this show's already off to a great start in that department. I'm hoping to see how Mando reacts once he realizes that his actions are actually you know, influencing the child, and I want to see if he thinks it's either a necessarily good thing or a necessarily bad thing. I love how in the softer and quieter moments, or at least ones that would normally feel like it, Deborah Chow just knew how to up the tension whenever we were dealing with Karga and the guild, before it was revealed that they were indeed going to be assholes in the first place. But I don't know, it's just she made it breathless the entire episode. I was never able to really catch my breath, and I enjoyed that from an episode that was a little over 40 minutes long. Also, the introduction of Giancarlo Esposito, Gus Fring from Breaking Bad as Moff Gideon, was even better than I thought it would be. I mean, because he was in the trailers, I just assumed that he would be the one to look out for throughout the majority of the show, but instead he was a silent hand behind the scenes, and now it's for him to basically do things himself, like Thanos said. And even though he has less than 5 minutes of screen time in this episode, he was off to an explosively great start. Now, in this penultimate episode, Deborah Chow once again shows us why we should be excited for her vision of Kenobi, whatever it ends up being, because after this episode, which is my favorite episode, my personal favorite episode of the season, I don't care what the concept is going to be for Kenobi. I trust her. She has proven that she is trustworthy, and I'm going to go ahead and trust her until, you know, I see the actual finished product, and then I look at it from there. But anyway, also, the death of Quill was not something that I had foreshadowed at all, and it actually hurt me a lot more than I thought it would when the camera pans up to him lying dead on the ground, because I just kept thinking, this man was a slave for so long, and maybe only got to enjoy a couple of years of freedom before inevitably meeting his end. It made me really sad, which just shows how good the show has been getting and actually is in the long run, because it made me care for this character who's barely been in the show for like not even like 50 minutes of screen time throughout 8 episodes. And for the finale, Chapter 8, titled Redemption, we open up with the scout troopers that took the child at the end of the last episode, and they get an extended scene which I loved. It just reminded me that even though the Empire is terrible, there are still people under those helmets, and also their banter just kind of reminded me of my job, where, you know, I'll be checking in with people at work like, hey, can I do this? And then it's just a bunch of hurry up and wait. You're just sitting there for a while, and every once in a while you would chime in and be like, hey, how about now? And they'll be like, no, just keep waiting. It really appealed to me, and also, we got that moment where both of them are firing blasters at some kind of jar or something, and they can't hit the damn thing, which was hilarious. It felt like a very Taika Waititi thing to sort of do, because he directed this episode. They just... And also, they kept hitting the child in the head because he wouldn't stop making noises, which obviously is completely unforgivable. But luckily, IG-11 shows up and kills both of them and picks up the child to protect him. In the meanwhile, the heroes are still pinned down in the bar, and they watch in horror as the Imperials start constructing this very destructive minigun that will basically kill them instantly behind any cover. And Mando wants to escape into the sewers to find his tribe, but the sewer grate in the bar won't budge. At this point, Moff Gideon dumps a bunch of expositional dialogue on us. We finally get the Mando's name, which is Din Djarin, which means I can finally stop calling him Mando. I hated calling him Mando for the longest time, but... hang on. Fuck. Yeah. We also learn that Kara is from Alderaan, which explains her motivations for wanting to defeat the Empire, but also why life is less fulfilling after the war. And we learn that Karga used to be a magistrate, which was kind of interesting. We also learn definitively that the Great Purge was indeed a mass genocide of Mandalorians, which leads Din to have the full Clone Wars flashback, showing us definitively that he was indeed rescued by Mandalorians shortly after the death of his parents, and he was raised under their creed. Before the crew can be taken out, IG-11 rides in with the child, and he lays waste to many of the stormtrooper reinforcements. Karga, and Din all run out to help, but they all retreat back inside the bar when Din is shot in the back of the head with a gun powerful enough to at least slightly puncture the helmet. IG-11 removes the sewer crate, and Din convinces everybody to leave him in the bar to die because he won't take off his helmet. A flamethrower trooper comes in to burn the place down, but the child uses his force abilities to push back the fire, and it pretty much annihilates the flame trooper, which was really cool. After he passes out from exhaustion, Kara and Karga take the child into the sewer, and IG-11 is able to convince the Mandalorian to take off his helmet, since IG-11 is not a human being, so Din doesn't actually break his code. And because of that, IG-11 is able to use Bacta spray to save Din, so they're able to catch up with the other two. They reach the Coven location, but all they find is a pile of Mandalorian helmets, and the armorer, who is still alive and seemingly unharmed. She basically explains that the Mandalorians were killed, but she was actually able to survive. The armorer gives Din the sigil of the Mudhorn, seeing as it was the child himself who saved Din, and names them a clan of 2, and she also gives Din a jetpack. She also explains to the group who the Jedi were, and tells Din his new mission, to either raise the child as his son and await the days where he can train to be a Mandalorian, or return the child to his family because this is the way. And the child becomes an official foundling, which was really nice. Our heroes leave, and the armorer stays to salvage the remaining Beskar off of the fallen Mandalorian armor. And we get this really cool fight sequence between her and a squad of stormtroopers. A fight that she survives, which I was not expecting at all. I thought it was going to be one of those cliche ones where, you know, she's fighting them, and then our heroes are walking, and there's a single gunshot, and that's it. I thought it was going to be something like that, but no, she actually survived because she's a fucking badass. Anyway, Din and the others find a ferry to take them down a river of lava in the sewers. The exit tunnel is guarded by stormtroopers, and IG-11 offers to sacrifice himself to make sure that his friends and the child make it out alive, and he uses his self-destruct, which was joked about in the first episode a lot. As they exit the tunnel, Moff Gideon attacks with his TIE fighter, and Din uses his jetpack to fly up and plant bombs on the TIE fighter's wings, and takes down the fighter. After this point, they consider themselves victorious, and Karga offers Din a new place in the guild, and Kara states that she'll stay and become a part of the guild, but Din turns down the offer to instead fulfill his new mission, which is to find the child's family. As the group parts ways and Din takes the child back to the Razor Crest, he also takes time to bury Queel before taking off, and after this point we get an image of Jawas scrapping Gideon's TIE fighter, and Gideon cuts himself out using the Darksaber of all things, the fabled Mandalorian-made lightsaber that has been a symbol for the ruler of Mandalore for generations, and you would already know that if you were a fan of the animated shows. And this ends the finale episode. This was definitely one of the better episodes, and I personally loved it. First off, I had never wanted Din to have his helmet removed, but I loved how they tackled it, especially after seeing how the helmet was removed and what the situation was. That was really nice. But also, I was worried that he would be kind of Star Wars-ified. You know, he'd have like a weird-looking look. But it was just Pedro Pascal under there. He was just a frightened man who seemed closer to death. And I loved how, despite his hatred for droids throughout the show, he finds a way to care about IG-11 because of their moment back in the bar. And, I don't know, it was kind of heartbreaking just hearing him say, "Please don't go, we need you." Well, I got through the entirety of the season. Preparing this part took me a while. I don't know how much time I've done in filming right now, but I know preparing the show notes took hours. Like, I'm talking about like 6+ hours, so I'm a little tired, but I will at least get through this next part. This is definitely the most work that I'll ever have put in a review, especially once editing is done. So, as As for my overall thoughts on the first season, comparing this to the sequel trilogy and my thoughts on Rise of Skywalker, you could tell that compared to the sequel trilogy, Mandalorian actually came with a plan, or at least a structure, to follow compared to those. And yeah, sure, it doesn't always seem like that, since this first season bounces back and forth from being either serialized or episodic, but it does work because they had concrete ideas of how to begin and how to end. I just hope that they find a way to balance those two ways better, or just pick one that they'd prefer, even if the next episode does end up mostly being basically a monster of the week sort of thing. Din Djarin is a wonderful character to follow, and I love him and what Pedro Pascal and both of his stunt performers have done with the character. Not only crafting a character that I love personally, but also being able to make me understand and tell what he's feeling even when he doesn't say anything, and when you don't see his face the entire time. I can't think of, off the top of my head, any other hero that had his face completely covered throughout the entire movie. Even with the Carl Urban version of Dredd, you could still at least see his mouth. With this one, somehow they actually found a way to convey his emotions throughout the majority of it, and I love that. And also, I can't talk about the lead without talking about the child. I personally hate the name Baby Yoda because, one, that's not his name, and two, it just confuses people who don't understand that the child isn't actually related to Yoda. And I'm not assuming anything about anybody that's watching this. I'm saying I personally know people who aren't as steeped in Star Wars who legitimately thought, before I told them, they legitimately thought that this was Yoda's child. So, I don't know. They could come out later and reveal that he is, because fucking everybody has to be related to fucking everybody in the Star Wars universe, according to Rise of Skywalker. Jesus Christ. Okay, calming down. Anyway, but for now, I will continue to fight this idea because, I'm sorry, if you're okay with everybody... I'm trying not to be rude. If you are actually okay with everybody being related to everybody in the Star Wars universe, more power to you. I just can't get on the side of that. I personally think it's as stupid as what a lot of people love about The Rise of Skywalker in regards to Rey's family. The show, for the most part, relied on its own story, and pretty much every episode was either good or great, save for that one damn episode, Episode 5. God, I fucking hate that episode. Anyway, as far as directors, in my opinion, Deborah Chow directed the two best, Taika Waititi made the next best, Rick Famuyiwa made two good ones, Bryce Dallas Howard's was also good, and sadly Dave Filoni directed the two worst, with the pilot just being an okay episode. Gina Carano did a really good job as Cara Dune, and I wasn't expecting much of her because I hadn't seen her in too much. But what I had seen her in, she was always great at the physical acting, but a little rough when it came to dialogue and acting. But like I said, she's great in this. And also, Carl Weathers in Star Wars should have happened a long time ago. I really love him as Greef Karga. He just fits in this area. And also, Taika Waititi was not only great as a director, but also he was great as IG-11. And I hope we get to see more IG units in future installments, be they film or TV, because I really love how they fight. I also have to mention the score. The entire show's musical score was composed by Ludwig Göransson. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but this was the first time that I heard someone else do a Star Wars score, and it didn't outright sound like just another John Williams clue with less soul. It felt majority original with only occasional callbacks, and I especially loved the opening theme, which the opening theme to me did sound like something from Star Wars, but it also kind of reminded me of the theme in the mines of Temple of Doom, which I think was also something that lended to me thinking about Indiana Jones with each episode that I went into. And then my last pro, which is the biggest thing for me, was all that lore and the character reveals and the development throughout, particularly for Din. And I know I've touched on that so much in the episode sections, but it at least bared repeating it just a little one more time. So that's it for my thoughts on Season 1 of Mandalorian. I really enjoyed the end product, and it showed that Disney is capable of making quality Star Wars still. Sure, I loved The Force Awakens, I enjoyed Rogue One, and I loved The Last Jedi, with Solo and Rise of Skywalker being some of the worst Star Wars movies I've seen personally, or at least in my opinion. But The Mandalorian felt a little bit more like home to me, honestly. The home that I feel when I think back to my childhood rewatching the original 6 movies regularly with my family, and it just feels good. It feels good to feel something similar in a modern-day sense with Star Wars. And I hope that I get more of this goodness going forward, and I'm hoping that we get a little bit more in the second season, especially if we are going to tackle the idea of finding out more about Yoda's species, which I like that they wouldn't be just outright throwing it to us. I feel like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni will more focus on, we have to earn the knowledge along with Din. We will only figure things out as he figures them out, and it'll be, it'll hopefully be a natural thing. But anyway, that's what I'm most looking forward to in the next season. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my video. God, my throat hurts. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and go to bed. I'll edit this video later, but don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, farewell until the next video, all of you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike, and keep on being awesome.